I'm going to talk about deep learning. Okay. So, and the idea is that this video is for those of you who do not have a mathematical inclination and just want to know what is this for and how does it work on the most general terms. Let's go with first a little bit of machine learning. Okay. Say for example, I have the following data set. Okay. Each one of these rows corresponds to a person, characteristics of a person. So for example, the first person is 182 centimeters tall, comes from Mexico. The eyes of the father are brown. The age is 32. Has one pet. The eyes of the mother are black. The hair is blonde. And his or her eyes are brown. Okay? And we have, in the same way, we have about 14 people. The machine learning problem would be to say, well, if I have a new person here, 175 centimeters from Chile, the eyes of the father are blue, age is 43, no pets, the eyes of the mother are brown, the hair is black, what is the color of this person's eyes? Okay, that would be a machine learning problem. And I can infer patterns here, and some patterns matter more than others. Of course, one clear pattern would be to see, well, what are the eyes of the father and the mother? We can see that if the eyes of the father are blue and the eyes of the mother are blue, like in this row, blue here and blue here, right? Then it's very likely that the eyes of the offspring or the eyes of the individual are going to be blue. Now in this case, we don't have blue and blue. We have blue and brown. Let's see if one of the parents has blue eyes. This parent has blue eyes. The eyes are blue. This parent has blue eyes, the eyes are blue. This parent has blue eyes, the eyes are brown, so not always. This parent has blue eyes, the eyes are blue. This parent here has blue eyes, the mom has blue eyes, the eyes are green, almost. This mom has blue eyes, the eyes are blue, and so on and so forth. And we see that in the majority of the cases, with one of the parents having blue eyes, the eyes are going to be blue. And this person, this unknown person, has blue eyes over here. Therefore, his or her eyes might be blue. We don't know, right? But they're likely to be blue. However, the country might matter, right? So in Iceland, Northern Europe, for example, or Italy, we might see more blue eyes, say, than in Chile or Peru. So that might have some influence. I don't know. Now, the other influence is, look at this. People with zero pets have blue eyes. Zero pets, blue eyes. Zero pets, blue eyes. Zero pet, blue eyes. Zero blue, zero blue. So this person has zero pets, probably has blue eyes. However, the pets have no influence on whether a person has blue eyes or not, or in the color of their eyes, right? So it is very much, this is very much a game of finding patterns and then finding patterns that matter for the problem. Now, in here, we have a lot of background knowledge. We know about genetics, so blue eyes and blue eyes are probably going to have a blue eye offspring. We know about certain ethnic components of the countries in which these people live in, right? But to a computer, this data set looks like this, okay? Not exactly like this, but something like this. Finding a pattern here is a lot harder because we don't have any contextual information. We cannot read blue or green here, right? All we see are symbols. How can we devise a way to find patterns and then find the patterns that matter in this kind of data? Okay, that is, well, machine learning in general, but deep learning in particular's challenge. So the inspiration for deep learning has roots in biology, okay, specifically in neural biology. This is a neuron. We call these guys here dendrites, and we call and then this guy's here, this tail makes synapses. This connects to other dendrites of other neurons, right? And then there's a chain of neurons that activates. Now, according to the inputs or the input from these dendrites, this tail is activated, okay? So the question is there a computational model that can model a neuron? And then can we model a network of neurons? And quickly consider humans. There's the switching time between a dendrite being active and the tail, spitting a signal is 1 millisecond. The number of neurons in the human body is about 100 billion. There's about 10,000 to 100,000 connections per neuron, so neurons interconnected with each other. And the brain is activating and interacting with these connections, uh, about 10 to the 15th, 1 quadrillion times, okay, at any given point, at any given instant. To recognize a scene takes us about a tenth of a second. And doing 100 inference steps to infer something, or to find something, or to classify something, doesn't seem like a lot when we have neurons. There's a lot of parallel computation here. So let's look at what the computer science people, right, or math people decided or devised as a model for a neuron. They call it the perceptron. And a perceptron is nothing more than, we have our inputs, x1, x2, these are, color hair, pets or no pets, the age, the color of the hair of the eyes of the mother, etc., etc. All the attributes, okay? All these attributes, we assign them weights, and this is basically a multiplication. You're going to multiply W1, weight 1, to X1, W2 to X2, and so on and so forth, and you're going to add them all together, okay? Now, what are the weights? Well, for example, if pets, you know that pets has no bearing, or height, you know that height has no bearing on whether a person has blue eyes or not, okay? Probably the attribute here that corresponds to height is going to have a weight that is very low, probably a 0, because it doesn't influence my decision, okay? So these weights can be taken as meaning how much influence in the final decision do each of these attributes have, okay? Now, to add to the model, they added a bias component that is always 1 and with some weight, okay? This is just it helps correct things in math, but for now just know that there's a bunch of attributes. Now we have to convert all the attributes to numbers somehow so we can multiply them by their weight. And there's this attribute which is a 1 and with some weight, and this is always, an additional attribute to all the ones that you have. You add all of these together, okay? And if the sum is greater than 0, you will output a 1, okay? So basically, say the 1 represents yes, then that means, 1 will say, okay, has blue eyes. If the sum is 0 or less than 0, or a negative number, then your output is going to be 0, which means no. So for example, if your output is 0 or less than 0, you will assume that these attributes here do not describe a person with blue eyes, okay? The math notation, this is as complex a math that I will get in this slides, is the following. The output here is 1 if the sum is greater than 0 and 0 otherwise. In other words, the output of all the attributes that you put in is 1 if W0 plus W1 times X1 times the first attribute plus W2 times the second attribute, etc., plus Wn times the nth attribute is greater than 0. That's when the output's going to be 1. Otherwise, it's going to be a 0. So, for example, because the other example was too convoluted and a lot of data, I'm going to do a little example with tiny data, with a tiny data set. I have this tiny data set here, okay, where I have 2 attributes. When both attributes are on, my class is false or no. When only one of them is on, or when none of them is on, then my classification is yes, okay? So if this is yes, yes, my class is going to be no. So for example, this attribute, imagine a product. This attribute could be the product is ugly, and this attribute could be is the product old. And I can say, well, if the product is ugly and old, I'm not buying it. If the product is ugly but new, I might buy it. If the product is ugly, if the product is pretty, not ugly, right? If the product is pretty and old, I might still buy it. And if the product is both pretty and new, I will buy it too. Okay, this is the data set that we have. Now, in neural networks, we have 2 attributes. Perceptron, we have 2 attributes. So I'm going to put them here, attribute 1, attribute 2. Okay, and I have my one attribute that is always 1, right? And I'm going to look for weights that added together will give me a number of 0 or less than 0 if attribute 1 is a 1 and attribute 2 is a 1. Will give me a number greater than 0 if attribute 1 is a 1 and attribute 2 is a 0. Will give me a number greater than 0 if attribute 1 is a 0 and attribute 2 is a 1, and will give me a number greater than 1 if both attributes are 0. And I came up with these weights: 30, negative 20, and negative 20. So let's do the math here, right? So for example, for the first example, 1, 1, and 0. This attribute is 1. This attribute is 1. Okay? And this sigma, or this blending thing where I multiply attributes by weights and add them. So 1 times 30, that's 30. I'm going to put 30 here. Plus 1 times negative 20, that's negative 20. Whoops. And then 1 times negative 20 is again plus negative 20. The result here is negative 10. Okay? The result is negative 10. So this sigma here is negative 10. Whoops. Negative 10. Now, negative 10, if we go to our previous slides here, the rule says that if the sum is not greater than 0, my output is going to be just the number 0. So my output is 0. Okay? And we have it. 1, 1 outputs a 0. Exactly this example. 1, 1 outputs a 0. Okay? Now, let's do the other one. I'm going to do this way. Let's do the other one. Now let's do this example. Okay? 1 and 0. I'm going to put a 1 here and a 0 here. Okay, 1 and 0. So this is 30 again. And this is the formula, by the way. 30 times b, which is 30 because b is always 1. Attribute 1 is 1 times minus 20 is negative 20, right? Because this is 1. And then attribute 2 is 0. So this whole term is 0. Okay? 0. So I have basically 30 minus 20. That is positive 10. Positive 10. Positive 10. Now, according to a rule, we go back again. According to a rule, this sum, right, was greater than 0. So I will output the value 1. So my output is 1. And I have 1 and 0 for the attributes and 1 for the output. 1 and 0 for the attributes and 1 for the output. So how did I find those weights? Trial and error. I just came up with weights. Okay, so now it's your turn. What I want you to do is to think about, now you have a different problem here. Try to find the attributes. The formula is here, and this b is always going to be 1. Okay, try to find attributes that when you plug in these numbers in these attributes, you multiply them by the weights that you will come up with, sum them all together, and look at your output. Your output has to correspond to the output given those attributes. Okay? Pause the video now and try to find those weights by hand. It's not too hard. Pause it, remember. Now, for example, I came up with the following weights. I came up with negative 10 for this one. So this is negative 10 here. 20 for the attribute 1 and 20 for the attribute 2. Okay, and that works. If you put, say, for example, 1, 0, 1, this is negative 10 plus 20, because this is 1, attribute 1 is 1, right? So 1, 0. So attribute 1 is 1. So I have negative 10 plus 20. And this is 0 because attribute 2 is 0. So negative 10 plus 20, that is positive 10. So my added here is positive 10. And therefore my output is going to be 1 because positive 10 is greater than 0. Again, attribute 1, 0, and output 1. In my table, 1, 0, the output was 1. I'm doing this correctly. Okay? Now, what I want you to try is to do the same thing again, the same thing you just did, and the same thing that I just did for this problem, these attributes. Again, pause the video, try to do it yourself. Pause the video. All right, what happens here is that this cannot be done with this perceptron. No matter what values you try, it's not gonna do this perfectly. There's always gonna be one off. Okay? So there's always going to be one off. You can try putting the same values that I put for the other one and start changing them. There's always going to be one off. Okay? So the morale here is that not everything is solvable with a perceptron. Okay? However, and to be fair, not everything is solvable with neural nets, but there's some simple problems that a perceptron cannot handle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine perceptrons. So we have the same set of attributes, and I have a perceptron. This thing here, sigma 101, I will say, just to save space, is equivalent to say sigma, and then the arrow, and then the output. Okay? It's the same as having those two nodes, just like I had here, where I had sigma and my output. I just put them both in one node called sigma output. Okay? Now, so let me get rid of my symbols here. All right. So this is one perceptron. We know that one perceptron cannot solve this problem. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the same attributes to another sigma output unit. Okay? And here's the thing. I'm going to try to see if I put different weights for the arrows connecting to here, for example, if I put different weights on these arrows than in the other arrows, let's see what I got for the two outputs. And then what I can do is combine the two outputs, okay, combine the two outputs into another output with a bias node, and then keep the output. I could have put sigma 12012, but then it would be too long a name. So here I expanded it, but here I collapsed it. Now, let's look at this one more time. I have one perceptron, two perceptrons, and if you identify it, there's a third perceptron here. The two attributes, the bias node, the sum of everything, and the output. And this here will output 0 or 1, so these are input nodes to this perceptron. Okay? So I have three perceptrons there that I'm combining. And actually, I can find some weights by hand, okay, that actually, if I have, these are my weights, you can test that actually this example works. So for example, 110, 1, 1, and let's see what happens. For sigma 101, I have 1 times negative 20 plus 1 times 30, that so far is positive 10, and I have 1 times negative 20, right? So that is actually negative 10. And negative 10 is less than 0, right? So the output of this node is 0. Now for this node, 1 times 20, see the weight here is 20, 1 times 20 is 20, 1 times negative 10 is negative 10, plus the 20, that's positive 10, and then 1 times another 20 is then positive 30, right? Negative 10 plus 20 is positive 30. Now that's greater than 0, so the output of this node is 1. Now 0 and 1. 0 times 20 is 0. 1 times 20 is 20, minus the 1 times 30 here, right? So 20 minus 30 is negative 10. Negative 10 is less than 0. Therefore, the output here is 0. I have values 1, 1, and output 0, just like this first row, 1, 1, and output 0. You can do this for the other values, and it works. Okay? The insight that I wanna say here is that this network, for example, these weights here for this network were actually the weights uh, for the first problem, or actually classify the first problem that we saw. And these other weights that go to sigma 102, okay, are weights for the other problem that actually I had you do, another one of the other problems that you solved, right? But so by combining features, we can get classifications of a different data set, okay? And the interesting insight here is that each of these sigma is actually a function that we already did, okay? It's dissecting this output and computing something different for this output. So one can think, for example, well, what if I had my data about the eye colors at the beginning of the slides? What if I could actually have certain functions that this one computes, for example, the nationality, and this one will compute, for example, the colors of the genetic component, the color of the eyes of the parent, right? And then, given the nationality and the color of the eyes of the parent, perhaps I can classify colors of the eyes much better, right? So this is the idea, the intuition of these nodes here. We're going to call these input nodes, output node, and these are going to be hidden nodes. Okay, so let's see some applications. So for example, there's a data set about Wisconsin breast cancer, right? So it's predicting whether not only whether, but how whether the tumors are benign or malignant, right? This is the input layer. The hidden layer has only two. I mean, this three here is the bias, so we don't count it. It has only two nodes. And this is the output layer, another two nodes. Now, in speech recognition, for example, there are these things in sound called formants, okay? And we enter the first format and the second format, so this is the input layer. Then we have a bunch of hidden nodes, and the output layer, basically, one of these outputs will be 1, the rest will be 0, or actually one of these outputs will be greater than the others, will be one of the others will be 0, that's fine. And that will tell us what word was said based on the formants from the sound waves. Okay, again, input layer, hidden nodes, output layer. As we can see, the input layer, the hidden nodes, and the output layers have no restrictions over one has to have, I don't know, however many nodes, right? Or one has to be bigger than the other one. There's no restriction there. Now, these are called neural networks because now we are, our neurons, our perceptrons are interacting with each other. The idea here is that some of the properties of artificial neural networks is that many neuron-like thresholds, we have many neuron-like thresholds switching units. So this threshold that is greater than 0 switches to 1, 0 or less switches to 0. There are many weighted interconnections among units. So this is the other thing that note here. The weights that go from these two weights that go to this hidden node are different, perhaps, than the weights that go to another hidden node. Okay? They're highly parallel and distributed process because as soon as they start distributing, they follow different processes. The idea, though, is to find these weights automatically. And the main algorithm that is used to find these weights, this is extremely simplified, but I don't think you need to know more than this just to get an intuition on how this works. The idea here is to initialize the weights randomly, so we'll just probably like you did on the examples that you had to solve, just put some random weights. Let's see what happens. You check the results against the training data. So you check your results against the expected results, right? Was it a 1? Was it a 0 when I put 1 and 0? You check those results. If those results are not satisfactory, you start making adjustments to reduce the error, so to get more and more examples classified correctly. And you do this until you can no longer improve your classification accuracy. For the examples that I gave you, the neurons fit them perfectly. Every instance there, every set of attribute 1 and attribute 2 was correctly classified. But in real problems, that's not the case. There are several attributes, and not every set is classified perfectly. But you gotta do this until the weights classify the best you can. So basically, if you classify 95% correct, and then you adjust the weights and you still classify 95% correct, well, probably that's where you want to stop adjusting the weights. That's the best you can do. Adjusting the error The key of this algorithm usually lies here. There are methods to do this more automatically and less randomly than what you did for the exercises, right? And the main method to train networks, not just a perceptron, but networks of perceptrons, is the one called backpropagation. Okay? This basically, there's a technique in this step that's really important. Okay? Now, having said that, now we know how to train neural networks. We know what neural networks are good for. Let's get another intuition, and we have an intuition, slight intuition about those hidden nodes being some separate functions that can actually group our data in some ways that hopefully will make sense. So people that study the brain have seen that in the sensory cortex, this part here, okay, different areas activate if, say, we see something, right? Say if we touch something, neurons around here activate, and if we smell something, neurons around here activate, and if we taste something, neurons around here activate, and so on and so forth. So depending on the input or the sensory input, different areas of this sensory cortex will activate. This is like these hidden nodes. If I have several inputs, right, the idea is that perhaps different hidden nodes will be more active, okay? The idea would be to represent those hidden nodes to see what they mean. However, we have one other problem, and this is where deep learning really shines, right? If we want to learn patterns from naturally occurring data, I will probably bring data that has no class associated to them. I'll just bring, say, for example, I want to classify, I want to group people, right? But I don't know if they're I don't have any attribute that I want to group them by. I don't want to know whether they have blue eyes or no. I just want to see, well, is there a pattern among all these people that are they're getting the same disease, right? Is there a pattern to that? Or I have images, and I have images of cars, motorcycles, faces, trees, houses. Is there a way that I can look at all those images, right, and start forming patterns and say, okay, this, whatever this image is, I'm not sure, but it's a house, right? I don't know which kind of house, but it's a house. This image here is an image of a motorcycle. This image here is an image of a face, right? Now, we only have those examples. Nobody is labeling the pictures as saying, this is a picture of a face, so I can train a neural network, right? These are unlabeled examples, and this is called unsupervised training. When people label examples, like for example, when we had this data set, right? People label the eyes here, okay? This is called supervised learning because I will train on examples that somebody already labeled. But when I would just want to learn from nature, I want to learn in the wild, we only have examples with no labels. So the idea is, can we find patterns, right? And actually patterns that help represent the data, not just any pattern. So there is a way with neural networks, right? And the kind of neural network that we use here is this morphology. It's called an autoencoder. And here's the idea. Say, for example, you have two images. Say, for example, you have two images. Here we have this image here, and here we have this image here. Whatever, okay? Now, the idea would be to say, okay, each image has pixels. So imagine, for example, just for a second that there are 10 by 10 images, right? 10 by 10 pixels. That means there's 100 pixels in this image, 100 little dots that can form that image, okay? And 100 little dots for this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get each one of the 100 pixels as inputs, x1 to x100, okay? And of course, there's a bias there. x1 to x100, I'm going to go to a neural network that has, I don't know, if I want, say, 20 features of these pictures, I will look at 20 right here. Okay, I have 20 features of this picture. So I will have, say, 20 or 50 hidden nodes, however many. And then what I will try to do is adjust the weights here. I randomly assign weights to this network, and there's as many output nodes as there are input nodes. okay? And what I'm going to try to do is adjust the weights so that if I put this pixel, this image, I obtain the same image on this side. So if this pixel was had value 1, I want this one to have value 1. So in a way, I'm sort of saying, okay, this is going to be supervised in a way. I mean, for this input, I want this output, which is the same. Okay. Now I will pass on this image here, so this input here, which is going to be different. So the weights are going to change. At some point, the weights, I will be adjusting weights, and I cannot, if these images are too different, there's no way I can have the input here and exactly the same output represented outside. I'm going to have a distortion of that output, okay? Something that looks in between this image and this image perhaps, okay? Something in the middle. And I'm going to have one unique set of weights here. The interesting thing is going to be in this hidden nodes. Because with one set of weights, what happens is I can say, well, what are the pixels that have the highest weights for H0? What are the pixels that have the highest weights for H1? And I can start forming pictures, intermediate picture representations that the hidden nodes have. So for example, I can say, well, there's this hidden nodes. What are the pixels that say highlight H0 the most, right? And I might say, it's the first pixel, this pixel, this pixel, this pixel, and then this pixel here. And I will be able, perhaps H0 will detect figures that have diagonals and loops inside that pattern. What is the pixels that activate H1? Well, so perhaps the pixels that activate H1 are the ones that have curves like that and then curves like this, right? So then this picture will activate this hidden node more than it will activate the other hidden node. Okay, that's the idea. Is that by trying to train on your own examples as target output, you're going to get like a mishmash here, but in the hidden nodes, you might get interesting features. The way to train these nodes is basically for each example, I will start with random weights, and then I'll try to produce the same input. This is called an identity function. So I'll try to model an identity function. And for each example, I'm going to adjust the weights, but it's just one set of weights with multiple very different examples. This has been done in face recognition, for example, and using a lot of hidden nodes, you get patterns like this, like diagonal lines here, perhaps more circular over here. This is in a data set with pictures, images of faces. Here you have, for example, circles on this side of the image and so on and so forth, right? With less hidden nodes and other variations that I'm going to mention briefly in a second, you get, for example, eyes. Look at this. These are all kinds of eyes, and this is a kind of nose. So you start getting a lot of patterns. And then with less hidden nodes, you start getting patterns of actual faces. This is plotting the pixels that are relevant for this. Say, for example, for this hidden node, these are the pixels that are relevant. And wow, it looks like a face, right? This guy looks like a guy with a mustache and some beard, some facial hair, right? So some patterns start to emerge. To be fair, this function, if it's greater than zero, it's a 1. If it's less than 0, it's a 0. That function, that threshold, can be relaxed a little bit with something called sigmoid, okay? Can be relaxed a little bit with something else. If the sum of the attributes, you pass it to some function, it's going to give you a number between 0 and 1 or between -1 and 1, but in a range, right? And that you use as your decision function. But basically, the main idea is that using this kind of neural networks, you can get the hidden nodes to represent something. And that is when you start discovering things about your text. These are probably, the set of 20, this is 20 hidden nodes, the set of 20 most likely patterns. And what people actually do, the way these things work too, is not just like this and let's find the hidden nodes. Usually you put a layer of hidden nodes and find it, and then here you attach another layer of hidden nodes and try to produce the same output, and you replicate this a lot. And then each set of hidden nodes will contain a different pattern. Okay? But that is basically it. It's a neural network with this morphology, okay, that you want to self-train. Researchers found different morphologies, right? But this is the most simple to understand, the most intuitive one, okay? And you start finding patterns in data. One last note about data is that in 2001, Banco and Brill from Microsoft Research did this comparison on classification of words. And they used several algorithms that, up to 500,000 words, there were algorithms that were better than others. But when you add a lot of data, so 1,000,000,000 words, right? So 1 billion words, the results were not the same. And more impressive, most algorithms perform equally the same. So there's a balance to be had between data and the kind of algorithms that you use. Deep learning and the autoencoders, okay? It's a simple algorithm, and there's good training algorithms for this. And it finds really good patterns. It finds really good patterns in data that are very useful. And I don't know if it's going to perform really well here. It might do with not a lot of pictures, might not perform well here, but it definitely shines, as you improve the amount of data. For more resources on deep learning, you can go to one of these two links. I think they're very accessible. They do have more math, and they do provide some of the algorithms that I glossed over. Thank you.